There's scenes here at Perry Park.
Chris Lynn has taken the wild thing and sent him.
Oh, Bateman! Wow! Yeah!
Okay, welcome to episode 36 of the Beyond the Sidelines podcast. My name is Finn, your favourite host, of course, and this week we're bringing you something a little bit different, and that is our beautiful faces. Dad told me since birth I have a face for radio, but for some reason, thanks to quarantine, we've decided to bring you video. Joining me, Campbell and Gusman. Gents, how are we?
Hello, everyone. Hello. How's it going?
Yeah, good.
How are we finding this video aspect, gents? Because it's a bit weird. I'm finding it a bit uncomfortable. First and foremost,
Yeah.
I don't know where to look.
Yeah.
I'm looking all over the place. I mean, I thought isolation would mean I wouldn't have to see you guys anymore.
Oh,
But,
rough.
Um,
Come on.
Just
Jeez.
be a bit
Settle
wary.
down. Yeah.
Think before you say, Campbell.
oh,
Jeez,
well,
but it's very fair, mate.
I
It's
regret nothing.
no regrets. It's the I guess the opposite of what we expected in isolation. But gents, we're kind of in lockdown, but not really. You can still go outside for I think it's 8 essential reasons. How's the first couple of days of it all treated you?
Good question. I feel like I'm a little bit more like it's actually really nice going outside because
That's the
people
thing.
are going outside.
That's the
more.
thing. You are going outside, Campbell, mate.
I know.
You went for a run. Elite, CJ.
Yes,
That's
I know.
still allowed. That's still
Athlete.
allowed. He's
But I
he's
didn't
trying to
before.
perfect. He's trying to perfect that summer bod. You know. I mean, it's
Well-
getting to the end of summer though, so you've sort of run out of time.
You guys know what, mate? There's another summer coming, all right? But you guys know that I've wanted to be getting into running recently,
Yeah.
and I've just got haven't got time for it. Haven't got time. Keep putting it off. Went for a run the other day. Went for a walk for the next 2 days. Like, what's happening? I feel like
Elite.
everyone's out. Everyone is out.
The thing is, too, Campbell,
Nice.
I'm not going to say your suburb, but it's quite hilly.
It's
Isn't it,
quite
mate?
hilly.
So
You know, I
it's a bit of a
ran
challenge.
downhill. I ran downhill on the way out. I went down to the park and then I ran around it, and then I remembered it's going to be an uphill.
Uphill battle,
An uphill
CJ.
for the whole way
Uphill battle.
home, and I was like, "Ugh," I was dying after that. Not fun.
But I guess when those mental demons start coming,
Mm-hmm.
to the fore, and they start saying, "Campbell, what are you doing this for? You
Mm.
don't need to do this, mate. You can, just relax."
You can
What
watch
did
The
you say-
Office in
what-
bed by yourself.
What did you say to those thoughts when you are, unofficially trying to chase that Olympic dream?
Well, I'm the master of my own fate. My destiny is in my own hands. I'll control that. But bloody hell, it was tough. There may have been like a few walking breaks in between there where I was like,
Well, I mean,
"Fuck this."
I don't think I've run any distance since year 12.
Oh, we can
Or at
tell
least-
that, mate.
at least in
I could tell you
school.
that, mate.
That's like 3 years now. So
Jeez, you are healthy. He
yeah.
epitomizes what health
well,
is.
I mean, the only reason why I exercise is walking from. I walk from my bed to the kitchen to make a 4 and 20 pie, some chips, and then I go back to bed. That's pretty much that's my exercise for the day.
Jesus,
and-
Gusman.
It pays to have a high metabolism, mate, because I don't
See-
have to exercise.
The
This is
beauty of
true.
the faithful who can finally see our faces is if you're looking at Gusman, you might recognize him from the cover of Men's Health, because that's exactly where he comes from, right?
And okay, I think
okay, just a
I'm
bad
actually
joke.
no,
Okay,
no.
you guys don't
I-
appreciate comedy.
No,
that
look,
didn't
Campbell,
land.
you'll
That
lo-
didn't
you'll lo-
land.
You'll lose me.
no.
That's
Okay,
what I'm
look,
saying.
I'm actually looking at myself now in the camera, and I look really, really pale. I hope it doesn't pop up like I'm not sick. Like I'm not ill. I'm not like on my last legs. It's the lighting in here. It's just shocking.
You got those fluorescents.
I'm usually rocking like a super sweet tan, like 10 out of 10.
Mate,
But
there's
yeah,
photos. There's photos on our Instagram of you
Yeah.
which aren't anything like that.
No.
You've just
What do
been
you
caught
mean?
out.
I look great.
Mhm.
Actually,
Yeah,
something
also, Gus is in the studio, by
yeah, I
the
was
way.
going
So
to
any
read my
of the,
mind, Siege.
on the same.
Those beautiful orange walls. That's where we film pretty much every week.
Ugh.
Yeah, we love it there, but
Yeah.
obviously with the restrictions, we decided not to have more than one person in the studio, I guess, this week.
Mhm.
Gussie deemed it as essential to go to a university that isn't his, because he is a QUT student.
This is
Yeah,
a good
this
point. I
isn't
didn't
even
think
my-
about that.
Like I probably shouldn't even be in here, but it's I'm actually using it, unlike most of the UQ students here. So
Take,
It's not false,
take a
mate.
bow. Jeez, Gusman,
Yeah.
take a
My
bow.
liege. My
And,
liege.
Campbell, let's
God.
touch on it, mate. You have a story from this week, the week that
I
was.
do.
You're telling me a bit about it when you stopped over at mine today.
Mm.
You punched
Yes.
yourself in the face.
Yeah.
How?
Some said it couldn't be done. My
Wait,
greatest
so-
enemy is me.
Yeah, is this part? So with you running, are you trying to be a boxer? Like, is that? So
I'm
you've
trying
done
to
the
inflict pain on myself. Is basically what I'm saying.
Jeez, okay, that got really dark.
That
Really
got
quick.
really dark. Yeah, I
Actually,
apologize.
straight up, I don't know how to recover from here. But mate, there's a
Yeah.
funny-ish aspect to this story that we're going to try
Yeah.
and spin it that way, rather than whatever that was.
Yeah. Basically, I for some reason there's been a few moths in my room recently, and
Hate 'em.
one, yeah, they're the worst. They're the worst. I was watching Netflix. I think I was watching Sunderland Till I Die. So
Oh,
watch it.
good
That's
show.
actually
Have you
that's
guys
actually
watched
good. No,
Would
Gus,
very good.
recommend. Very
New
good.
season out. New season out.
season
So
two.
Is it out now? Oh,
it's out.
brilliant.
Yeah, watch it. It's really good.
Yeah.
By the
It's
way,
quite-
the chief executive is definitely like a David Brent impersonator. Like,
Mate, thanks online. Jeez,
Thanks,
you just read
mate.
that from somewhere.
cheers, mate.
No, it's actually quite good, but it's quite sad because throughout season one, you got a little bit attached
Mm.
to the club because, I mean, we have no affiliation with Sunderland, just like most
No.
people in Brisbane and Australia. But you watch it and you start going, hey, I actually like that club.
Mm.
I think it's pretty cool. But then they get relegated. Spoiler. And season two, we know that it's not all, sunshine and
Mm.
rainbows as well. That
It's
it goes south,
yeah.
not as bad,
Mm.
but they don't exactly accomplish all their dreams. So it's
No.
kind of just waiting to watch, something die.
It's a car crash.
Well,
You're watching a car crash happen.
I mean, the reason why I watched it was because it was so dire. I mean, because they were doing so badly, and I thought it was funny to, watch the whole club just fall to pieces. I thought that was very hilarious.
Well, actually,
And
they-
like, I don't
People
hate
losing
Sunderland.
their jobs, mate. People
Like,
losing
yeah,
their
no,
jobs.
I mean, I don't like that. But I mean, I don't like Sunderland. I don't hate them, but
they're a
it's
bit of a
just,
nothing club.
it's just funny to see the sort of thing happen and to actually document it.
Mm.
I think it makes for good watching. It's
Well, Gus-
hilarious.
Gusman, you mentioned the club falling apart. It's far from that, though. Hey, like, you look at the fans, like, they're packing out the stadium with light. That's like a 30,000 capacity stadium.
No,
And they're playing
it's like 50K.
There you go. Prove me wrong. Actually, I don't know if it is. I might look
They
that up.
on Boxing Day last year they got 46,000.
There you go.
So
Damn it. Anyway, but yeah, exactly. Well, 46,000 people to a League One game. That doesn't happen.
That's the record.
That's Div 3 in English football for those who
Oh,
aren't
yeah.
aware.
But I mean,
it's
England.
very impressive. And mate,
Very impressive.
even like the when they speak to some of the fans and they really get to know their stories, these are people who work during the week to go see Sunderland on a Saturday. They work to get season tickets, right? It's crazy.
No
Well,
doubt.
I mean, yeah, they're they're the north of England, aren't they, Sunderland?
they're
So
in
I mean,
Newcastle.
they're a big. I think they're a big manufacturing or fishing
Big
district
industrial.
area. Yeah,
Industrial.
if I can
area.
remember it right. But yeah, no, they're very passionate. But I mean, it just shows how passionate English people are for football, and even in League One, I mean, you're getting crowds of 46,000. That's pretty amazing. Like, I'd love to see that in Australia one day.
Mate,
I don't think it's going to happen in the near future, but hopefully we can get people packing out A-League games.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's
Bit of
further
wishful
away
thinking.
than we'd like to admit, I think.
Yeah.
But something I'd like to see is a resurgence of rugby union, gents. That hasn't been great, I guess, in years gone by since 2002. Actually, I've got to mention it. This is the first year in 16, 17 years that the Wallabies won't lose the Bledisloe. There you go.
Huge.
Congratulations,
Huge.
Australia.
We'll take it at this point. honestly.
No, but speaking of a bloke who sadly never won a Bledisloe is Stephen Moore. He's our guest this week. You might know him. Campbell, actually, before we flick over to the interview, mate, you met him in person.
Yes, I
You
did.
approached him and you said, hey, I've got a podcast. You want to be on it. What's your number? And
I'm sure he said it like that. Yeah.
well, I'm not 100% on the details, Gusman, but I'm pretty sure that was basically it. Campbell, take it away.
Yeah, so I was working at my old job in the city for a company called Crumpler, which are like a retail bag store. You guys know I work there. That one's mainly for the listeners, but or the viewers now, I guess. I don't know.
Faithful,
The
CJ.
faithful, just a blanket term for them. But no, so I was working, right? I was looking after someone, and then I see a big, working. I see a big 6'2" bald guy come in. I was like, oh, interesting. And I thought I recognized him. Oh, that's weird. Finished with the guy I was serving. Went over to him. I was like, yeah, mate, need a hand. The normal kind of sales pitch spiel thing. And then I hit him with the classic. I hit him with the, like I didn't know what was happening. I was like, Stephen, right? Stephen. And he didn't quite. Yeah, he liked it. He was like, yeah.
How was his handshake?
It's a good
Very
handshake.
important.
Very good
Okay.
handshake. This is when we could handshake, by the way. This is when everything was fine. But we got talking about footy and stuff, and I mentioned that we'd had Fraser McWright on the show and a few other grammar old boys and stuff like that, as well as, me being a grammar old boy and UQ and stuff like that. I got talking about footy, about the Reds, how they're going, yada, yada, yada. And I thought, well, I said, well, mate, I have a podcast. And he got it up on his phone. He had a look at it and he subscribed. So he's a subscriber. So
Really?
Oh,
there you
beauty.
go. Yeah, on Apple Podcasts. Yeah.
How about that?
A big move. And then, he gave me his number. That's the first successful time getting a number from someone. So,
And the rest is history.
and the rest is history. Thank you very much, Stephen. It was a great time. And I immediately called Finn and started freaking out. I think I called Dad. Yeah, I was hyperventilating. I was out the back. Freaking out a little bit.
Still a great story, mate.
Thank you.
Bit of nostalgia. And, mate, it's a real showing of, working class hero that you are.
Yes.
Working hard to make your dreams come true.
Exactly.
Won't let anything hold you back, even another employer. Anyway, bridging into that interview with Stephen Moore, again, he's played over 175. Well, it's 176 Super Rugby Super Rugby caps, the two Super Rugby franchises, over 100 test caps for the Wallabies. He's a legend of the game, well and truly. So you can listen what he has to say now. Joining us now is former Wallabies captain Stephen Moore. Mate, thank you for joining us. How are you approaching this coronavirus thing at the moment? Have you started self-isolating, or are you a doomsday prepper? How are you approaching it?
Thanks a lot for having me. Really appreciate the invitation to get involved. And look, it's a really tough time for a lot of people, isn't it? It's been really interesting to watch it all play out, and it's a very bizarre time as well. So, personally, we're all working from home. I work for a large cattle company, so we've got a lot of cattle properties all around Northern Australia. So most of our staff already work from home, so that's not too much of an issue. But obviously, we have to monitor the traffic in and out of our cattle station to make sure that we protect our staff from anything coming in. We've got a lot of people moving around on stations, so we're trying to limit that as much as we can. But I see school now is going to be closed from next week, so that adds another challenge to a lot of people's lives. And I really do, watching from afar, really do feel for the people out there that have unfortunately lost their jobs or working in industries that are very greatly impacted by what's happened. So it's an incredibly tough time for a lot of people, and certainly feeling for those people, and feeling very lucky to be in an industry that can continue to operate for the time being. But as we all know, we just don't know what's around the corner for anyone at the moment.
Yeah, definitely, mate. Incredibly tough times, unprecedented. And we've seen the effect in sport at the moment too. Super Rugby, of course, was one of the first sports to go, and also the proposed idea of a Australian domestic Super Rugby competition that would have seen the Western Force come back. I just want to hear, your thoughts on, the benefits of that competition, and do you think it could have inspired, a new wave of support here in Australia?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of different parts to that question, so I'll try and unpack it a little bit. I suppose the first thing that I get the sense of is that there's a groundswell in Australia for domestic grassroots competitions. So, you would all be going to things like club rugby around the country, and there's definitely been an increase in support domestically around people attending club rugby and people following their local team. And I think it talks to that tribalism a little bit. People really want to connect deeply with things, and club rugby has that history that clubs have been around a long time. You've got really deep connections right through the juniors for a lot of clubs, and that means a lot to people. So there's no doubt that there's an interest and a growing interest for that grassroots competition. Now that obviously has to work in a commercial sense. So that's the key part, to make that connection between what works commercially for the people that are paying for the broadcast rights. So in this case, Foxtel and the likes, but then what also works from a participation point of view, and also from a supporter game day attendance point of view. So there's a few different things to consider. And whilst things like grassroots rugby and club rugby, it's great from a community point of view, it maybe doesn't satisfy the broadcasters as much. And I'm not privy to those conversations, but you need to have a content that people at the broadcast level want to pay for and has value. So obviously Super Rugby, when it first started, was a combination of Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. The format worked at the time, and it had a lot of value because it was new, created a competition that sort of straddled a number of different broadcast agreements and geographical locations, and there was enough tribalism there for people to be able to connect with. So I think over time that's been eroded a little bit. The competition's become very confusing with the conference system. I think people don't really know half the teams or who's playing who at what time and who's on top of the conference. And I think once we went into that phase of having conferences and different, countries having teams up and above each other, that created a high level of confusion around the supporter base, and I think people are still dealing with a little bit of that, and it probably eroded a little bit of that tribalism, So the competition structure itself definitely needs some reworking, I think, and that's been sort of widely spoken about. And what the answer to that is, I'm not entirely sure, but I do get the sense that there's a real demand for local content and for meaningful games. People don't have an appetite to watch games that don't have meaning. They'll just switch off, and that's probably where as rugby, we're at a bit of a disadvantage from the likes of the AFL and the NRL, is we don't have that sort of domestic tribalism that they are able to create through their competition. So, as I said at the start, it's a complex issue. There's many different parts to it, but the one thing I do know is that we can't keep going the way we are. I think the current competition structure is flawed and is going to continue to lose interest if we don't do something reasonably major to change it. And it's important to note that we can't just keep tweaking it. We need a pretty significant change, in my view, to be able to bring this whole thing back to life. And as far as the Force go, I was particularly disappointed to see the Force leave the competition. I thought, from playing a lot of rugby in Perth over my career, it was always a place where I felt they were big on having their own team, very parochial. It's a great place to play test matches. A lot of expats from the likes of England, South Africa, and New Zealand. So it made sense to have a rugby team there. But I also understand that there was economic issues at play there that made it unviable to operate ongoing without continued support from Rugby Australia, and that just wasn't possible. Now, the thing I worry about is that have we created exactly the same situation in Melbourne? We've just shifted the problem from Perth to Melbourne. I'm not sure. I don't know the economics of that situation, but I do worry that having a professional team in Melbourne, we're going to be continuously up against it to make that a viable proposition. So there's plenty to think about there, and that's quite a long answer to your question, but hopefully I've provided...
It's a great answer.
It's a great answer. No, mate, I 100% agree with that. Melbourne, it's an AFL market, and trying to make rugby work there seemingly so far hasn't really, I guess, reached the heights that people hoped it would, and there's no broadcast deal. So the broadcast deal expires for Super Rugby at the end of this year. No deals yet for next year. And the Sunwolves, they're going. It's one of yet a number of changes that are happening year to year. And you mentioned it, the conference system. It is so confusing. And again, it changes every year. So, Stephen, what would you propose as an idea going forward? Would you revert to NRC, possibly, and try and get some tribalism there and have that as the domestic season? Or what would you do?
I've seen the value of the NRC from a development point of view. I think it's been a really tremendous concept for developing players to go on and play Super Rugby predominantly. Has it attracted the supporter base that maybe we're seeing in club rugby? Probably not, and that comes back to that tribalism again. We see, clubs like, for example, I'll talk about maybe a club like Warringah or somewhere like that in the Northern Beaches in Sydney, or Jeeps here in Brisbane, or Brothers, or those clubs have long history. You see them really connecting with the community, and people who live in those parts of the world really resonate with their local team, and there's something there to be done. There's just something about that really makes sense for us. And whilst I thought the NRC was a great development pathway for players, I felt like it wasn't a great competition in terms of interest and creating eyeballs and that sort of thing, which is really important. You have to consider everything in all this, because one thing doesn't work without the other. So which is difficult. I know that it's been a really successful pathway, and actually some of the rugby in the NRC has been terrific, but it's not going to work if no one has any interest in it or people aren't watching it. So, there's always that thing to consider. And look, in terms of what I think the solution is, I would love for us to have our own domestic competition. I think it's a hard one to articulate, but we do need New Zealand, but we also need to do what's best for rugby in Australia, and they'll do what's best for rugby in New Zealand. Don't worry about that. And they will definitely do that. So we should do the same, and we should be confident to have a crack at something that works for Australian rugby. And if that involves New Zealand and Japan and South Africa and Argentina, then that's great. But if it doesn't, we need to have the courage to be able to say that. And ultimately, that's how the game's going to be successful. If it works domestically and the Wallabies are successful, then the game will thrive. So grassroots, it keeps coming back to, as I said, around club rugby and the benefit and the value that has. If we can figure out a viable way to commercialise that, then, that might be a good outcome. And, maybe we get to the point where, this may accelerate at the coronavirus, where it goes a bit like soccer, I guess, where your top players are maybe not always playing domestically. I mean, the gap between what we can pay players at club level in Australia and what we can pay players in Europe, or what clubs in Europe and the UK can play players, is always, it seems to be growing all the time. So unless there's a sort of halt in that, I think we're going to see a continuous drain of players both from Australia and New Zealand and South Africa into those competitions. And I think you would have seen last year in the World Cup Final, like the Springbok team, I think quite a small number of those players actually played in Super Rugby. So they're already experiencing that big drain offshore. And I know we want to fight to keep our players locally, but at some point you need to recognise where your priorities are, and we can be sort of dragged into that sort of bidding war between paying our top professional players. That balance is critical, and I've been a player myself, and I've seen how that all works. But so I don't want to speak ill of the professional game, but we need to really watch closely the amount of money we're injecting into the professional game versus what we're going to do with grassroots, and what the whole professional what the professional proposition looks like from a TV and broadcast and supporter point of view underneath the Wallabies. That is critical for us to get right.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm of the opinion, you mentioned there a domestic competition, purely Australian. I'm of the opinion that a big problem with what's happening in the Super Rugby at the moment is the Australian teams just can't compete with the New Zealand teams and the South African teams. Do Australians need to see Australian teams winning again? Is that something we need to see? And is that something that can potentially be bred in a national, whether it be club competition or just see a domestic competition within Australia? Can Aussie rugby survive without New Zealand and South African teams? And do you think that could be potentially a way forward?
Yeah, look, once again, I think there's a couple of parts to that. So if you look at Super Rugby so far this year, I would say that the Kiwi teams, it's very evident that they're starting to feel the pain of losing a lot of their top players to overseas clubs. There's no doubt that the depth across the New Zealand teams has thinned out a bit in the last year or two. And any games that I've watched, I think that is really evident across the Kiwi sides. And whilst you've still got that top tier of players are still world class, I don't think at the moment they've got as many world class players as they probably have had in the past. And I think some of the Aussie teams have shown that we're not that far away from them at all. So from a competition point of view, I think if we get a few things right and we keep working on our professional pathways and the professionalism of the game in our country, then we can match it with New Zealand, no doubt. I'm confident of that. But the other part to that is, where's the interest going to come from? Look, you look at the stands in New Zealand and they're empty as well. People aren't watching. So people are not feeling the need to go and watch the Highlanders play the Brumbies in Dunedin. Like, there's just no people in the crowd. So how do we fix that? Because players don't want to play in front of no people. It's not a viable way for the game to continue, in my view. We want to see a competition where people are busting to get to the game and you can't get a ticket. That's the kind of competition I think we want to try and create. So from a competition point of view, I'm confident we can compete. But you raise a good point around having winners. Like, that's the other thing about the NRL and the AFL is someone's team is always going to win domestically. So if you support Carlton or Richmond or the Sydney Swans, you've got a chance that your team could win. Whereas, if a Kiwi team wins the comp for 5 years in a row, like, no one's interested in it if we're not playing in it. So that's the risk you run. And you want your finals to be the culmination and the pinnacle of your season. So if we don't have teams involved at that end of the season, then the interest just goes through the floor.
Yeah, absolutely,
So
mate.
that's the tricky one.
I think what we've seen in the past too is, with Queensland's success in State of Origin and, of course, the domestic competitions, like you said, the AFL and the NRL, a lot of rugby fans are just going, I'll support that team because they're winning. And that's why they're leaving rugby in a sense. But let's look at the future of Australian rugby. Mate, is there light at the end of the tunnel? You look at some of the young crop of players who are coming through, such as Tate McDermott, Harry Wilson, Jordan Pate, all Queenslanders. Mate, is the future bright for Australian rugby?
Yeah, look, I don't want to jump the gun here because I think we can get carried away at times. Focusing on the young players, I think we need the players who have been there for 5 or 6 years to be leading the way. Like, I think we just lose sight that they're the important part of, particularly the Wallabies. Like, it's not like people like Harry Wilson and like they've barely played Super Rugby. So let's just give them time to develop. And, we're already talking about them playing 100 tests and all this sort of stuff. And maybe they will, and I'm sure a lot of them will. But I think where our issue is in Australia at the moment is that group of players who have played between 30 and 50 tests. We don't have enough world-class players in that category at the moment to be competitive with the best teams in the world. So, yeah, we've got good juniors and our under-20s went well last year, but that's happened before and it'll happen again. But let's be serious here about who we need to carry the Wallabies forward. It's not the guys who have not even played yet. It's the players who have played 30 to 50 tests. So I think we need to make sure we focus on that as much as we focus on these young players, because otherwise we come in with all this pressure and people are expected to save the whole team from falling apart or whatever it might be. But I'm a big believer in you look back at the World Cup and we didn't have enough players that played at that world class level, and there's a lot of players in that team that have been there a long time. So that's the cohort we need to be trying to get the best out of, because it's very hard to come into a test environment straight off the bat and go straight to being world class or a match winning player. So we just don't have enough players at the moment that you could categorise as world class, and we need to ask ourselves why that's the case, particularly if we've got good under-20s teams coming through all the time.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned there these players potentially playing, 100 tests going forward. Someone who did play 100 tests, over 100 tests. That's you. How was your international career? How did you find being in the Wallabies?
Oh, look, as a kid, it's obviously a dream. You never think it's going to happen. I grew up in central Queensland in a little town called Mount Morgan and Rockhampton I lived in for a while before I came down to school. So, look, I had posters of the Wallabies on my wall. I watched them play. That's where your dreams sort of are created. And when that comes to life, I guess it's pretty amazing, and it's something you never expect is going to happen. But when it does happen, it's an amazing thing to be part of. And it meant an enormous amount to me every time I got to do it. And it doesn't matter if you play 1 or 100; they're all very special. And I took everyone as serious as the last. And it was something that, for that period of my life, it was the most important thing in my life until I started having a family. And I took it incredibly seriously. So that's the responsibility that you take when you pull that jersey on. You're representing your country, not just yourself and your family. Like you're stepping into the living room and the hearts and minds of the nation, and that's a really powerful thing. And it's a big opportunity, but also it's a big responsibility. So, I tried while I was there to weave that every part of that into my preparation in terms of how seriously I took it. And I suppose as I became a leader in teams, then I tried to sort of impart that on my teammates and share that kind of feeling and get people around me that thought the same thing. I was very lucky to play with some great players and some great leaders that taught me a lot and that contributed a huge amount to the team. And I think that's something that really helped me through my career. But yeah, look, it's an amazing thing. It's a very memorable part of my life. Whilst there was a lot of tough times in there as well, it's something I reflect on very fondly, and it's given me a lot of skills and friendships to take forward into the next phase of my life. So I'll always be grateful for the role that rugby has played in my life.
Absolutely, mate. Do you have a career highlight of your time in the green and gold?
Oh, there's probably a couple. I think I suppose my first test was a big highlight for anyone. The first time you get presented with that jersey, you pull it over your head, you take the field, you get your cap after the game. You have a beer and sing the anthem in the sheds after that first win in your first test. It's pretty cool, like that sort of stuff doesn't leave you quickly. And I think that was certainly something that I'll very fondly remember. I think it was my third test. We played the Springboks at Ellis Park, and
Jesus, wow.
And we met Nelson Mandela before the game.
Jeez,
so
man.
at the time, I didn't quite know the enormity of that type of thing, but as I started to read more about it and witness the impact that he had on the country, obviously when he passed away and the reaction to that sort of thing, it made me realise that was a pretty special thing to be part of, let alone in my third test. And I suppose I didn't know what to think at the time, but that was very special. And also, I guess being part of World Cups, they're an amazing pinnacle of the game and out globally, and to be able to do that in 3 different World Cups and also be involved in a final. And whilst we didn't win, so ultimately it was very disappointing to be part of a journey with a group of mates and to make it to a position to compete for the trophy. That was pleasing, and I was very proud of everyone involved in that. Right from the playing staff to the players to the coaching staff, and that was as tight a group as I've been involved in. So I've got lifelong friends in that group that will be with me for life.
Absolutely, mate. And you mentioned the World Cup. I've got to ask, how good was it to knock England out of their own World Cup at Twickenham?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of most memorable games of my career, that's probably got to be up there. I think the circumstances were that England, they had to win the game to stay in the tournament. They're obviously the home nation and the host of the World Cup. Enormous amount of pressure. It was a massive game. The lead up to it was huge. There was press, the usual stuff in the UK. Is a lot of press around the game, a lot of hype, and to go out and play as well as we did. And I thought that was as well as we'd probably played for a long time. In that game under pressure, I was just so proud of every player that was involved that day, and that was a pretty amazing thing to be able to do. And I didn't take any satisfaction from England being knocked out. Like I didn't, I've been in that situation where you lose a big match, and it's a terrible feeling. So I didn't get any satisfaction from seeing that, but I got enormous satisfaction from the fact that our group performed like they did under enormous pressure and delivered on the day after we talked about it all week. We planned, we sharpened the axe every day, and then we went out there and did it. And they're the kind of things that you remember when you actually go and execute on your plan, and you talk about stuff all week, and then it comes to life on the field, and that's a pretty good feeling, and gives you a lot of pride in your teammates when you see them individually deliver their part, and you can be a small part of the collective effort to do that. So it was actually really interesting on the Monday after that test. We got a call to say we were going to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen.
Yeah, well.
So off we go. We were staying a little bit out of town, I think in Bath or something, and we got in the Land Rovers and off we went. We drove straight in the front gate of Buckingham Palace. It was a little bit surreal, but
a little bit, yeah.
Here we are all. Yeah, we just drive straight in the front gate and park out, in the middle of the palace. And get
standard
anyway,
stuff, yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so. But Chris Robshaw was there, and he was the England captain, right? So 2 days before, they'd been knocked out of the World Cup in their home tournament, big pressure, all that sort of stuff. But I'll never forget the way that he held himself at that time. And, I remember having a chat to him just saying, mate, how's the last couple of days? And, he said, look, it's been shit, but life goes on and the sun will come up. And, I just thought the way he presented himself at that event but carried himself in the aftermath was something that I think is a great example of humility and someone dealing with adversity in a really positive way. And he went on then to remain in the team and be a key member of their team for the next few years. So, I always try and share that story because not many people saw it, but it's really important because, he could have just folded and been angry at the world, but he picked himself up quickly and got on with it. And I think that he deserves a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, no doubt. And, you led the Wallabies to the final against New Zealand. You mentioned this before. With the final score, it was 34-17 to New Zealand, unfortunately. I know Finn's probably a little bit happy about it, but we won't talk about that, about the end result. But an absolute blockbuster, the highest overall scoring final, combined at the time at least. How was that game? What was that like?
Yeah, the final was it's a huge occasion, so you've got to really work hard and try and block all the peripheral stuff out, and that's not easy. I don't think anyone finds that easy because the week's different. There's extra media to do. There's a lot of fanfare. You've got mates and family flying in from all over the place trying to get hold of tickets, and I had the Prime Minister and the Governor General ringing me on my mobile, just wishing me good luck and things like that. It's just different to a normal week. So it takes some real mental toughness to be able to block that out and actually say, well, we've got to go out and play the game as well. So, I've got no doubt that to win those games, you've got to do that better than the other team. And New Zealand did that better than us. I don't think we did it that poorly, but they had players in their team who had been there before and been on those, that World Cup final day or week, and I think you really call on those kind of players during times like that. So, that's something that I think was part of the difference between the two teams. I think that they went out and played, their game. We gave it a fair crack, but in the end they were too good, and we just came up short. But I think part of that whole thing is being able to deal with the scale and the enormity of a week like that, and the fact that we had probably most of our team hadn't been in that position before, so it was all quite new, and just those almost sort of subconscious things that go on during the week. It's very hard to block that stuff out for everyone. So that only comes through experience and having been there before. So, and look, they had their senior players stepped up and delivered on the day. Dan Carter being probably the top person on that list. I remember seeing him hit that drop goal from nowhere, and that's a great example of just performing under pressure. Just bang, over it goes, and that becomes the difference, and that turns the game. That kick, So I was proud of how we fought our way back into the game and put ourselves in a position with still time to go. But they showed that they were the quality team and very much deserved to win.
That's it, mate. But even the character of the Wallabies throughout that World Cup to get to that stage, surviving, the pool of death, Pool A, was incredible character. But, mate, I've always been curious about this, so I want to ask you this question. What's it like to face the All Blacks haka, including in that match?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's one of the great theatres in sport, I suppose, the great parts of the game, of our sport. I've always had a lot of respect for it. I guess as I went on in my career, I just saw it as another thing in the game, that we was, one thing I probably learned as we went on, we tried lots of different things during the haka, and I wasn't certain throughout that they ever really had a great bearing on it. I've always tried to see it just as something that happens at the start of a game, and then when it's over, you just start the game. I know it means a huge amount to the New Zealand players, and they derive a hell of a lot of energy from it. So that's great. And you look at the example in the recent World Cup of England, what they did during the haka, and did that rattle New Zealand? I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe it did, but you always try. The margins are so thin in these big matches that you try everything you can to try and rattle the opposition and put them off their game, and good luck to them. They did that, but look, generally I thought it's a good thing that as part of the game. It's been part of the game for a long time, so I respect that.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And overall, were you satisfied with what you've achieved throughout your career?
Yes and no, I suppose. I guess I was lucky enough to, as I said, play in World Cup finals, semi-finals, quarterfinals, Super Rugby finals, semi-finals, quarterfinals, but didn't win one. So that part that stays with you, and that definitely eats away at you a little bit. I would have loved to win both of those things, obviously. But how much time you spend thinking about that after you're retired, I don't know. I've tried to move on and reflect on the positive things in my career, and that was, as I said, probably the enormous part of my life that it was, and also the fact that I took it really seriously while I was there, and I tried to put everything that I had into every opportunity I got in the jersey, and I think that's what the jersey deserves, and I hope that continues into the future, and I'm sure it will, but we need to keep speaking about the importance of that, the importance of that jersey and what it means, and it's not just another game. You sort of carry the nation with you whenever you're playing for your country in any sport, and that's a real responsibility as much as it is an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And just to finish, 100 Super Rugby caps for the Brumbies. In terms of Super Rugby, where's home? Which club do you identify with the most in terms of the Brumbies and the Reds?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, actually, and I'd probably say my most enjoyable time in Super Rugby was at the Brumbies. I had 8 seasons there. The first couple were very tough. We really struggled to get our team culture right, but once we did that, it was a wonderful place to play rugby. And the Brumbies have got quite a long and proud history of being successful. I found the Brumbies and the Reds very different when I was there. So, to be quite candid, I found the Brumbies have a much greater desire and much greater hunger to be successful than the Reds do from a player point of view. I just found that the program at the Brumbies lends itself to players being desperate to win and doing whatever they need to make that happen, whereas I never felt that at the Reds. I didn't feel that was part of the fabric of the team. It may have been at other times throughout their history, but I didn't feel that when I was there. So, that's something that I'm sure Brad has worked on and identified in his time there. So it seems to be, some of the young players that are getting involved now start to, have that sort of winning mindset, and winning is the last thing that happens. Like winning is the outcome of everything. So it needs to be, your career or your rugby career needs to be your life. Like you can't turn that on and off, because performance is dictated by preparation and attitude to life in general, and sacrifice and discipline around everything you do. So you only get the outcomes you want if you're obsessed about it, and you really give it your everything all the time. So that's something I felt the Brumbies did really well. It was really a performance culture that, unless we won, we were never happy. So that was something that really drove us hard every day, and on and off the field. And so look, like I said, I think the Reds are, they're certainly showing some good promise. I'm really, really big on that point I emphasised at the start, though. We need to make sure we're not putting too much pressure on these young players that have only just started their careers, and some of that pressure needs to be carried by the players that need to step up, who have been there for a number of seasons now. So unfortunately, they're probably the cohort of players that you're most at risk of losing to overseas clubs. But when I talk about players that were like that in my career, it's people like Scott Fardy. He drove the culture in the team. He wasn't a superstar, but he got the most out of what he had, and he performed at a certain level every day. And he was very hard on his performance. He was hard on his teammates performing and getting it right at training and on the field. And I just worry, do we have enough of those players around at the moment? Because that's what creates a team culture. It's not who the captain is. It's not who the young player is who's just played under 20s for Australia. It's those players in the middle who drive the standards, drive the culture, and bring the young players through and teach them about what it means to play for the Brumbies or the Reds or the Wallabies that make teams successful.
Great point there, and you do need those grinders in your squad. Did you always want to return to Queensland, return to the Reds, or was it just an opportunity that kind of came up towards the end of your career?
An opportunity came up, I think. Yeah, I didn't really want to leave the Brumbies at the time. There was some circumstances there that just meant that it wasn't possible for me to stay, and the opportunity arose to come back to Brisbane. Look, I think I knew at the time that I was certainly closer to the end of my career than the start. So I knew that at some point I'd be retiring, and that would probably be in Brisbane after I'd obviously decided to not go overseas and continue my career in Australia and finish it here. So, yeah, look, I came back with a view to staying for 2 seasons. Obviously, I retired after 1. And if I reflect on that, I think that stage I was in my career, I found it a huge task to turn around or to be part of a turnaround of a culture that was really poor, around a lot of the things I've just spoken about. So, if I'm honest, I'll probably my energy and my desire to actually see that through had probably diminished a little bit. I felt like probably a little bit spent, at that point. So. We didn't have a real core of senior players driving the thing, and that's important for any team who wants to be successful. You need to identify who your core of senior players is that's going to set the standards and drive the culture of the team. And someone like Liam Wright, he is a very young captain, and he's going to need, or I'm sure he already has, he's going to need half a dozen other players who could be the captain, who are there with him by his side driving this thing, So unfortunately, most of those guys are like 20 and 21. We don't have a lot of guys who are experienced at the Reds, but that's really that's not a situation any club wants to find itself in regularly, is where you don't have those. I don't call them grinders, because they're actually the most important players in your team, and often they're the best players week to week. Like if you look back through the performance, it's often those players who no one really notices, or you don't often, they don't get man of the match or something all the time, but they're actually your best players. If you look at their stats, their consistency, they're actually your best players every week, and that's what makes a team. You need players who are going to deliver every week, no matter if you're playing in Brisbane, in Durban, you're playing a test match, it's raining, you've had a bad sleep the night before, you've got to have people in your team who you can rely on to just deliver, no matter what. And there's been a few players like that around, but I just think we need to develop more players like that with that level of resilience that you can set your watch to their performance, because that's how your team really gets to to great heights, and you play consistently well, because there's not much between the top teams. It's just who makes the most mistakes or the least mistakes, and who gets the basics right every week. And then ultimately, you end up in the finals if you do it enough. And anyone in the finals, is a chance. So when you talk about the great teams, whether it's teams like Canterbury, all they do is just play well every week.
Yes.
They're not doing anything that there's no magic wand or magic potion that they're drinking, or they just play well every week, and people do their job and deliver week to week, and that's their culture. Their culture is prepare the same, perform the same, consistent person, just turn up and do your job. And if everyone does that, we'll be fine. So that's something I think we need to just continue to focus on that in Australia.
Yeah, mate, definitely. Only time will tell, I guess, to see if Australia can improve in those areas, but definitely some valid points made there. But Stephen Moore, really appreciate you taking the time and joining us today. Thanks again, mate.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thank you.
And thanks again to Stephen Moore for chatting to us this week, mate. He was a great guest, gents. He a bit controversial, I guess, in a sense, especially when he spoke about where his identity or where his allegiance lay when it came to Super Rugby. He started his career for the Queensland Reds, then went to the Brumbies, played, I think it was 117 caps. If I'm right, that's pretty good, because that is off the top of my head.
I'll get it
and
up.
then he returned to Queensland for, I think it was a season in 2017. So, but he said quite openly that it was the Brumbies. And again, listen back to the interview. He didn't choose his words well, I guess, in a sense. He didn't hide his words.
No, it was 117, by the way. 117.
Oh, how about that?
Good stuff, mate.
There you go.
That's why I pay you the big bucks.
Only the good stuff. Yeah, well, not yet. Hopefully one day.
Yeah.
But Campbell, mate, I'll ask you, what did you think of the interview as a whole? Especially, I guess, he commented also on the Western Force, and I guess the future that may hold.
Yeah, so I really, really enjoyed actually a lot of his answers, and they really made me think a lot, I think, especially in the moment, because, we'd ask him, what do you think of the future talent of Australia? And we on the podcast have been very optimistic about it. Especially about Queensland.
Yeah.
We've been saying the Reds are fantastic. They've got a great lineup, which they do, I believe. But Stephen was very much of the mindset of, yeah, they're really talented, but we can't give them that much pressure to start off with, and we can't put the whole team on their shoulders. You need those. He mentioned Scott Fardy as one of those players who was in the 2015 World Cup squad with him. You need those kind of players.
Scott Fardy, mate, very good player.
No
he
doubt.
was instrumental to that Wallabies team throughout that 2015 campaign. And then he went to Leinster over in Ireland, I'm pretty sure. Again, this is off the top of my head, so just work with me here. But I'm pretty sure it was a year or two after he went to Leinster that he got nominated for European Player of the Year.
Wow.
So again, good player. And it begs the question, why are Rugby Australia letting these players go? Surely they have the funds, or at least had the funds, to keep these players in Australia. You look at more recent examples, Jets. Samu Karevi, the Queensland inside centre and captain. He's gone over to Japan. Where's he gone? Like, what's going to happen? David Pocock, he's old, I get it. Yeah. But he's still our best. Well, he's still your best back rower by a country mile.
No doubt,
mate. It's all money. Money talks, and unfortunately, right now, Rugby Australia they just don't have the funds, and they're really struggling to keep talent in Australia. And it's not good. It's not good for the future of Rugby Australia. Hopefully, there's a lot of talent coming through, especially at the Reds. Hopefully they can keep them on the books, and hopefully we see a good Wallabies in the future in the next maybe 5 or 10 years.
Let's hope so. We also talk about the Western Force as well, as you mentioned before, and how we'd like to see them back in the comp. And
Luke Morahan.
Luke
wanted
Morahan.
to see them back.
He did. Stephen Moore wanted to see them back. It seems like a franchise that we could see back, but recently, looks like it could be going the other way.
It's a bit of trouble in paradise, CJ, I guess, in a sense. Obviously, coronavirus, it's hitting any and every league in a very, very impactful way at the moment. It's very significant. And Rugby Australia, it's already trying to recover in the wake of that Israel Folau saga anyway. And now, it's in a broadcast battle. It does not have a broadcast partner for 2021 onwards. A Fox going to want to re-sign when, let's face it, the game is dying.
No
Down
doubt.
under adjustment. It's dying. League is on the up. I think league is on the up. Fox Sports are doing league and AFL so well.
Very well.
That they're gonna take all the fan base.
No doubt.
I think rugby is in a lot of trouble. I mean, especially after that Israel verdict, I think that was a big blow for them, and I think it was a big blow for Raylene Castle as well. I think she's going to struggle to recover from that and from now this coronavirus pandemic. I think she's in real trouble. I think she may lose her job, and I think Rugby Australia, look, it's in dire straits right now.
I was just about to ask you that.
Whether Optus Sport picks it up, I think that'd be a good destination, but it looks like Optus is sort of going football. They're going, okay, I'm going to put all my eggs in the football basket or whatever the saying is. And I don't know if this is official, but there's been talks about A-League going to Optus as well. So it looks like Optus is going the football route rather than rugby union, which is sad.
Yeah, well, we spoke about this a few months ago, Finn, actually. So if anyone wants to hear our verdict on it, go listen to our Extra Time episode. Rugby Australia is on the ropes.
Expert analysis, I think.
Expert analysis.
Gusman, again, that Folau saga, mate, that was 8 million blows, wasn't it? That is so significant. And the question that has to be asked now, I think, is what's the future going to hold for the game in Australia? Obviously, a few years ago, when the force got cut, that was Rugby Australia going, Melbourne, for some reason, is the better rugby destination. It's not. It's not. There's so many expats over in Perth that it just does not make sense to relocate a team.
I mean, even rugby league. I think rugby league struggles to compare with AFL in Melbourne. I mean, AFL's just so entrenched in Melbourne that it's just like, is there any point? Like, really?
I would say no.
I mean, Perth as well and Adelaide. It's just so entrenched that there's no real point. I think you just got to focus on where it works. And I think Union works Queensland, New South Wales. You just sort of got to go there.
I do agree.
Look, rugby
and maybe WA. Yeah.
Rugby union's very much an East Coast sport, isn't it? Queensland, New South Wales, as you mentioned, they are the two big states. But then you've got the ACT Brumbies, based in Canberra. Historically, I'm pretty sure they are the most successful. Well, they are actually the most successful Australian Super Rugby franchise. So they're not going to go. So really, it's plainly obvious, isn't it, gents? If a team's going to go, it's going to be the most recent addition to the Super Rugby competition from a Australian-based team point of view, and that's the Melbourne Rebels.
No doubt. Well, we asked Stephen this as well. Could we see a domestic competition in the wake of this? It's the future of the Super Rugby competition is in doubt. There's no doubt about that. The South African teams want to split. The New Zealand teams probably want to split as well. Could we even see a only competition?
Yeah, I think we should do an Australian-based competition, domestic competition for Super Rugby, or don't call it Super Rugby, call it whatever. But it's got to
Oz Rugby,
yeah, whatever it is. But you've got to. I guess you got to foster more rivalries and stuff. You got to have more teams in a competition rather than what was it, 5? I think in the Australian.
It's 4 at the moment. Mate.
4, sorry, and plus 5. Western Force. Yeah,
no, it's 5 including the Sunwolves. So the only issue with that, Gusman, is how do you develop that tribalism? And when the sport is, let's face it, dying, how do you reignite that passion for a sport? I guess one option would be Shoot Shield. Well, you look at all the Premier Grade competitions around Australia, in Melbourne, in Canberra, in New South Wales, and of course, Queensland Premier Rugby up here, predominantly in Brisbane. If you could merge those somehow, maybe across 2 divisions, then sweet, you're off to the races. But can they fund that? Can UQ really fund for their team to go down to Sydney to play Sydney University once a season? It's really tough. But as Stephen Moore mentioned, CJ, tribalism, that's key. That's the key word.
And we bang on about this so much. Tribalism is the most important thing.
And you look at the NRC, mate, that's just not getting it. Because there's no desire.
There's no history. It's a competition made out of thin air to combine a bunch of club players to put them on a pedestal
Exactly.
to show their talents, right?
Exactly.
There's no action. They're not clubs. It's regional based teams. And the only way I think this works is a combination of Premier grade competitions. So Queensland Premier grade, Shoot Shield, like you said, I think that's the only way. Because you look at Brothers, they've got a great fan base. You look at UQ has a great fan base too. Jeeps has a great fan base.
Yep.
Like they're probably the teams that stick out of mind first. East, maybe. I don't know who else could be included.
South,
maybe South. South,
It's,
would be my next.
Again, I think the only issue with that is finance, is money, and I don't think the clubs can fund it. So
if you have help from Rugby Australia, because it wouldn't cost as much to run a setup at a club like that than it would for the Reds.
Look,
I would assume.
I'm of the opinion that I think South African teams, they could very well go join the Pro 14, as 2 teams have already. New Zealand they've done it before, albeit I think before the professional era, but they had their own provincial competition. They could do it.
They could definitely do it.
They're crazy about the stuff over there, Gusman. But I'm not sure if Australia can. If they could fund it, beauty. Maybe they could take a page out of the AFLW's book, the conferences, and do that some way. And maybe, because that's what they do, actually, the New Zealand high school system.
North
first
versus
15
South.
system. No, that's a national competition, but you start off competing in Auckland and in Wellington and stuff, and then if you top it, sweet, come together. So maybe there's something to, I guess, note there, or something to build off. But
no doubt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're Rugby Australia, what's the one thing you're focusing on when this pandemic sort of ends? What's the main thing you want to start doing, I guess?
Making
money.
money.
What are you putting your limited resources into?
I think you need to become the family sport. I think that's the only way that these, like cricket, like the T20 became the family sport. And I think that's what every club needs, or every league and franchise, everything like that needs to kind of work towards. Is it starts with the kids. We've mentioned this a million times, but it's tribalism. Starts with being family friendly. You don't need to be fully family friendly, but also in talking about South African teams in the competition in the Super Rugby at the moment, do Australians really care when a South African team plays?
Like when they...
No, I don't really think they do.
No, absolutely not. You know, to be fair, South African rugby is quite boring in a way for the most part. It's quite traditional, isn't it? It's hard men, it's big men, it's angry men charging up through the middle and really beating you physically in order to win a game. It's not exactly the most expansive or exciting style of rugby.
In addition to that, though...
It gets the job done. So
yeah. Oh, no, it does. But in addition to that, though, does Keith from Kenmore care about Durban? Does he even know where Durban is? Does he know where Pretoria is? Does he know where Johannesburg is, for that matter?
Actually,
they don't really care. They don't care about South Africa. They don't know the landscape. Like, why should you care? If you know...
It's definitely more likely. It's definitely more likely for Keith from where'd you say Keith was? Keith from Kenmore to rock up to a Queensland Reds versus New South Wales Waratahs game than he is a Queensland Reds Sunwolves game or whatever.
No
I
doubt.
mean, it's obvious you've got to. God, I just saw that. You got to get that tribalism going. We're going to mention it so many times, but you got to have that rivalry between Queensland, New South Wales, Queensland, WA, all that stuff before you worry about overseas sides and stuff like that.
No doubt.
They've got to make it an Australian domestic competition, or it just won't survive.
Well, I guess we'll move on from this. I think it's kind of just repeating it, but I will say this. Now's the time for action. Post-coronavirus, sport as a whole is going to be very different. Not just rugby as a whole. Every competition, every sport, very different. So, and with the broadcast deal expiring, this is when Raelene Castle really needs to, muster up the courage and go, hey, let's live dangerously, as I like to say.
I'm sorry. I can't take you seriously wearing that.
Sorry?
I can't take you seriously, mate. I can't take you seriously wearing that thing on your head.
Mate, you look like a good Sydney Roosters costume, mate.
That's funny.
Anyway.
Funny guy. Haven't heard that one before.
Thank you, mate.
Anyway, gents, we won't touch on league because let's face it. Why? Actually, I mean, maybe we'll touch on it just very, very quickly. The resort idea.
What?
It's come back. And I just don't understand it.
Okay. I think I explained this to you guys over Messenger, but it's tough to do that. Anyway, pretty much what they're doing is they're trying to figure out different ideas that they can take to Channel 9 to make sure that they still have a broadcasting deal for the future, because Channel 9 are apparently going to rip up their contract. Earlier in the week, they were saying that due to this virus, they're not going to keep playing rugby league on Channel 9. So they're trying to figure out how they can get a full season in by the end of the year. And I mean, this is one of the ideas, but obviously it's like a really outlandish idea, but that's the one that the media outlets want to report on, because it's, you know, it's crazy.
Channel 9 were chatting about it, mate. So
yeah,
anyway,
I know.
Anyway,
it's just an idea. And I don't mind it as an idea as long as we get a season in. Like, I don't care what they do.
Anyway, I think this is a good talking point, but I think we don't have time for it this week.
Yeah.
Next week, Gusman, you can have your bets, mate. You can have your
I'm ready.
Go on.
I'm ready.
Go on.
We've got it penciled in, mate.
Penciled in. Lock it in, Eddie.
Lock it in.
Anyway, something we did actually plan before the show was talking about AFL Evolution 2. Now, this isn't sponsored. Should be. That'd actually be quite cool.
I would love that. By the way, it got released early, so it's out now as of Thursday, the 2nd of April. So you can go get it. It got released early because of Corona. So
now, again, we are kind of running out of ideas when it comes to sport and coronavirus. So I don't think we've spoken about esports at all since the inception of the show.
I mean, it's not sport, is it?
We spoke about Knowlesy once because he bought an esport team.
He did. That's right.
Shannon Knoll. We spoke about that once.
That's right. That's very true. But anyway, talking about AFL Evolution 2, they've released the team values or the team ratings. And I just want to quiz Campbell and Gusman here by asking them who sits where. Easy as that. And what their ratings are. You ready?
According to AFL Evolution, the producers.
Correct.
All right. Well, what's the rating? I've never played this game. What's the rating?
Out of 100.
Out of 100? Okay.
Anyway, who sits top, gents? And what's their rating out of 100?
Richmond will be at the top with a rating of 93.
Gusman?
I'm going to say Richmond as well, and I'm going to go 89.
Both wrong. Richmond are actually equal fourth.
Ooh.
Would you believe it?
Okay, how many points are they on? Let's have another guess for the top.
Collingwood.
Bulldogs.
Collingwood on 90. Collingwood on 92.
Jeez, are the Bulldogs that low?
They're 99. 99.
How can they be below the Suns? Jesus.
Not possible.
They're below the NAB Rising Stars.
Stop that.
Tack Cup.
Gusman is right. The Pies they get the chocolates. They're on. They've got a rating of 85. But again,
that low.
Equal fourth. Now I want you to tell me the other two teams above the Tigers.
Geelong.
That's one.
And GWS.
Yes.
Is that for both of you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The two teams above the Tigers, you were both wrong with both.
Oh, wow. West Coast?
West Coast are one.
Must
and
be
the
one.
The other one does not make sense, gents.
Hawthorn?
Makes sense. No. No.
Sydney Swans.
The Lions? It can't be the Lions.
It could be the Lions, actually.
It's not the Lions, is it?
It's not the Lions.
Okay.
CJ, mate, who was the most underwhelming team last year in terms of expectation versus result?
Melbourne Demons.
Melbourne Demons are equal second.
Oh my God, you're kidding me.
Yeah, so basically, I'll just read it out quickly. Let's just marvel with me. On top spot, Collingwood.
That's
equal
fair.
Second is the D's and the Eagles. Equal fourth, the Cats, the Giants, the Hawks, and the Tigers.
The Hawks.
Hawks are up very high. I thought they might be very high.
That's way too high for them.
It is too high. They're all on 83. On 82 points is the Crows, the Lions, Carlton, Essendon, and the Doggies.
Why are we so low? This makes no sense.
I actually, that is true, mate, because before the season, remember, didn't some data...
Champion Data. Champion Data ranked them as the number one overall team.
There you go. So this is just absolutely baffling.
Who's doing the research there? Who's the statistician?
Gusman, probably. On 81 points. That was pretty funny. Funny. On 81 points. The Kangas, Port, Saints, and the Swannies. 80 points is Fremantle, and unsurprisingly, dead last, Gold Coast Suns.
Can they go into the minuses for the Gold Coast?
Yeah, maybe later in the season. We'll just see how it tracks.
Minus 80.
Minus.
Yeah, basically, it's again we don't speak about esports too much, but there's nothing else to chat about.
Oh,
Really?
that was shocking.
Wimbledon has been cancelled. Actually, that is something that
Yes.
is kind of noteworthy. If we do want to chat about sport actually being sport, that's the first time since World War II. I think it's been cancelled. So again, it's just another. It's just more evidence of the fact that this coronavirus both has been and will be very severe in the long-term future.
No doubt. And we hope everyone's keeping safe, washing your hands, sanitizing, keeping your distance like we are right now. Stay away.
Yeah, basically. And but if you don't want your sporting fix, we try to, I guess, post every couple of days. You can chat. You can follow us and like us. Go on. We like to be liked.
Just do it.
I think Gusman really enjoys the validation.
Yeah.
Just it's a big ego boost.
Yeah.
It's on Facebook.
Someone likes me.
on Facebook, you can find us at Beyond the Sidelines. Pretty simple. That's the name of the podcast. So hopefully, if you're listening up until this point, you know that's the name of our show. And the other option is Instagram, where, let's face it, we probably post more often.
Probably.
That's at _Beyond the Sidelines _ I've said this before. There's 2 underscores. A bit tricky. Don't forget them.
Trick for young players.
Exactly. But we did just reach the 2K mark on followers, which Champers, mate. Champers in 6 months.
Yes. In 6 months.
No, which is a pretty, I guess, pat on the back for us. It's a small victory, small celebration for us. That's been a long time coming. But I guess thank you guys for, tuning into the show so far and making it what it is.
Exactly. And now it's video.
You're making me emotional.
You get to see our ugly mugs. So.
It's all good fun, and it's all good fun for the most part, I think. For the most
I
part.
think so.
And I guess, like I said last week, if there's anyone you want us to speak to, or especially now, if there's anything you want us to speak about, and just share our views, we're 3 armchair experts, really, but we'll give it our best. And if there's anything you want us to speak about, shoot us a DM. We do respond because we have nothing better to do.
Exactly.
That's going to make you feel good.
Exactly.
Feel good. So,
it's usually me replying too. So.
What does that say about you, Siege?
I've got a lot of time on my hands, buddy.
Too much time, pal.
Too much time.
Anyway, and this is episode 36, so we're approaching the 1 year mark, albeit in a couple of months. But there's still 35 other episodes that you may not have touched. Go for it. I'm going to be honest, they do.
It's free.
It's
Yeah.
well, we haven't discussed that actually, Campbell. We might start charging. Let's face it. This is great content.
Oh yeah. Times are tough.
Times are tough. We've got to earn a buck. I'm not essential like Gusman.
Exactly.
Which is a shame. It's no, but there's 35 other hours of podcasts. They do get better as you go along, I guess, but great interviews nonetheless. So go check it out. Anything you guys want to add before we finish?
No, I'm done.
I'm
Gonna
done.
go
Stay safe.
Get a frozen Coke from Hungry Jack's.
Oh.
Yeah.
You wouldn't drive out to
I was gonna say,
my
you can
unnamed
stop by.
suburb, would you?
No.
Oh, it's on the way, mate.
It's basically on the way. Just a 20-minute detour.
Exactly.
No, I have one Hungry Jack's that I trust.
Yeah.
You know, they deliver every single time. So
Heaps are better.
keep going back.
Taringa Hungry Jacks. I know
That's the one. Yeah.
You were shining, mate.
I was about to say that. Like,
You were shining.
like people have been roasting me for years about my hairline and the lack thereof.
He buffed his head.
Bowling ball.
I got to look good. I don't know who's watching, so you know.
Oh God.
Anyway, on that note, tune in next week.
Yeah. Bye.